Yes, so my background is as a baby doctor. I've spent many years working on a big care unit in central London at University College Hospital and caring for a whole range of many types and problems with little babies. But some of the tiniest babies that I've cared for are extremely premature babies. And this is an example of a premature baby at about 28 weeks of gestation. So out of the normal 40 weeks or 9 months, it's now possible for babies, thanks so much, to survive right down to 24 weeks, 23 weeks, even 22 weeks. In fact, the youngest baby that I cared for that ever survived was born at 21 weeks and 6 days. So it's an astonishing thing to look after these little babies. Some of them are literally the size of the palm of my hand, just fitting into a hand, and the ability to allow these babies to survive has dramatically changed over the last 30 to 40 years. As you know, we've just had the 50th anniversary of the Abortion Act, the first Abortion Act in 1967, and when that Abortion Act came into pass, Parliament took 28 weeks as the limit at which it was possible for a baby to survive. And in fact, the statistics showed that in 1967, well below 10% of babies born at 28 weeks could survive. Now, the statistic is about 85 to 90% of babies born below 28 weeks. And this is not because of just one single advance, it's really due to a whole series of advances in the ways that we're able to care for babies. A much better understanding of the physiology, the way that babies are actually different from adults, and the way that premature babies are different from babies born at term. But there's also been a whole advance in the technology, the ability to care for extremely tiny and vulnerable little babies. And the modern care, neonatal intensive care, is a very sophisticated kind of care. It involves teams of doctors, nurses, and other professionals like physicists and physiotherapists, even speech therapists who have special expertise in the muscles of sucking and swallowing. And on the unit where I've worked, there are something like 110, 120 professional staff, something like 20 to 30 specialist paediatricians like myself, 70 or 80 neonatal nurses, and then a whole range of other specialist staff, all dedicated to trying to give these vulnerable little babies the very best chance of life. And it's an enormous privilege to be able to care for these tiny little human beings, but also, of course, it can be very tragic as well, as we struggle to save babies, and sadly not all the babies make it. Many times I've had the privilege of having to care for dying babies and to support parents through this whole roller coaster of seeing their child on the edge of life. This is an older photograph taken on the neonatal unit where I worked, just to show the kind of sophisticated technology that's involved. Somewhere in the middle of that there's a little baby. I'm not sure, yeah, it's there. You can see the pointer. You can't see the pointer, but the baby's head is right in the middle, and the body and everything else is the technology keeping this tiny little baby alive. In fact, that's my hand. I'm one of the babies on the baby unit, just to give you an idea of the scale. And progressively, year on year, there is a continued improvement in survival. These are published figures showing the increases in survival between 1995 and 2006. These represent surveys done of all the babies born in England and Wales, and showing, if you take 23 weeks for instance, an increase from 11% to 20%, 24 weeks from 26% to 38%. This is an average figure across all the baby units in the UK, and you wouldn't be surprised to find that some units that have very specialised staff and equipment, the survival is much better than in a district general hospital, for instance, which may not have the same kind of specialist staff. So in my own unit at UCH, the survival now for babies at 23 weeks is over 50% in general, and many other specialist intensive care units have the same kind of experience. One of the big issues that we struggle with is the very difficult issue of brain damage, which can happen in very premature babies. This is actually an MRI scan taken from a very premature baby, and the white in the centre of the brain is bleeding, and this is a very significant and major problem that can happen in very young babies. And because we can do these kind of scans, it leads to all kinds of questions and challenges about how we use the information. This is actually a post-mortem slide of a very premature baby's brain. You can see that it's different from an older child or adult's brain. If you look at the surface of the brain, you can see that it's very smooth. It doesn't have the normal crinkles, what I call the sulci and the gyri of a normal brain. And that's because at this stage of development, the brain is still relatively underdeveloped. And actually that's a very positive thing, because as the brain continues to develop, it can actually repair a lot of the damage that happens. The brain can rewire itself. So there's a very strange paradox that if you're going to wreck your brain, and I don't recommend it, but if you're going to have brain damage, actually the very best time to have it is as a premature baby, because the brain then has the capacity to rewire. And some of the children we see in the follow-up clinic who've had significant brain injury have actually done remarkably well, because the brain has this ability to rewire itself. But we do have some frequent challenges about, as we care for these babies who are being kept alive with very invasive technologies, trying to struggle with, to ask, what is the right thing to do? Is it ever right to say enough is enough? And if it's clear that the baby is dying, or that the baby has had catastrophic damage which isn't compatible with life, is it ever right to say that we should stop and allow stop the life support treatment? And so one of the things that we have to do as doctors is to try and balance the benefits that our invasive intensive treatment is bringing against the burdens and the risks of treatment. Well, actually, this is something that's true at every stage of life. It's also true at the end of life with older people, where you have to try and work out, is the benefits of the treatment that we're giving greater than the burdens and the risks of treatment? And I believe strongly that if it's clear that the treatment is bringing some benefit, then yes, that we should give every baby the very, very best benefit of chance. Every baby deserves the very best and to have a chance of life. But if it's clear that the risks or the burdens of the treatment is actually doing harm greater than the possible benefits, then there is a time to say enough is enough, and to switch off the life support treatment. And that's something we then have to discuss with parents, and we often have these quite very painful and agonising discussions as we try to work out together what's the best thing to do. And it's really because of these kind of situations that I was faced with as a doctor that I became more and more interested in the whole area of medical ethics and how we as doctors can try and decide on what is the best way of dealing with these agonising decisions. And I've come to the conclusion that yes, there is a time to say enough is enough and stop the treatment, either because the child is actively dying. If it's clear that sadly the baby is dying, then there's just to carry on treatment to try and keep the baby alive as long as possible. When it's causing harm or distress, seems that something that's wrong, there is a time to say enough is enough. Or else, as I've already said, if the burdens of the treatment are greater than the benefits, then there may be right to say enough is enough. One of the questions is it ever right for us to try to make a decision about whether a life is worth living or not? There are some doctors and ethicists who say that's our job as doctors, that we should decide whether a life is worth living. I very strongly think that that's wrong. I don't think that any human being has a right to say to anybody else whether a life is worth living. Every life is precious, every life is unique, every life is significant. So I don't think we as doctors or anybody else can ever say to somebody else that their life is not worth living. But I think we can ask the question, is a treatment worth giving? That's not the same question then. So we have to make questions about treatments. We have to decide whether or not a treatment is appropriate. So, as I sometimes put it, I think that we as doctors can make quality of treatment decisions, but we can't make quality of life decisions. It's not something, we can't judge another life. As you probably know, there have been many high-profile cases which have come before the courts involving babies in intensive care and whether or not decisions should be made to switch off life support treatment. So the way the law works in the UK is that provided that doctors and parents agree together on what's the best for their child, then it isn't necessary to involve the courts. But if there is a fundamental disagreement between doctors and parents, then in the end the case has to come to the court, and in the end a judge will decide. And the decision is always made on what is in the child's best interest. It's not what's best for the doctors, it's not what's best for the parents, what's best for the hospital, it's what's best for the child. The child's best interest is something that the judge will have to make. And over the years I've been involved in a number of sad cases like this where I've had to give evidence in front of a judge and discuss all the various evidence and make my recommendation before the judge, but ultimately it's for the judge who will decide what is in the child's best interests. And as you probably remember, just last year we had the case of Charlie Gard, who was a baby who was very sick in intensive care, and this then, the doctors felt he had a very unusual, rare kind of neuromuscular disorder which led to paralysis, but also to progressive brain damage. He was being kept alive for many months, in fact, on an intensive care unit. One thing that's often lay people are not aware of, and that is how incredibly invasive the process of being in an intensive care unit is. People have calculated that on an average day, a baby in an intensive care unit will have between 80 and 100 procedures, which will involve things like sucking out tubes, taking blood tests, a whole number of other things, positioning, various other examinations, all because of the intensive support that's going on. And when this is going on day after day after day after day, we, the professionals, worry about the amount of trauma that this is causing to a child. And if there's really no prospect that the child can get better, then this is where we think that the burdens of these treatments are far greater than the benefits. And so the staff who were caring for Charlie Gard, as they were seeing him deteriorated, and he'd got to the stage where he was completely paralysed and was unable to move, and the scans had shown there was really very severe brain damage, and unfortunately there was really no prospect of any treatment that would help. They felt the best thing for Charlie was to switch off the life support machinery, but his parents were absolutely committed and believed that he was going to get better, and they were hoping for some kind of miracle cure, and so they opposed the decision of the doctors, and this then went to the High Court in London. But then, because they went on social media, there was a massive social media campaign, lots of people turned up, and demonstrations, and it became an extraordinary sort of almost like a soap opera, which was evolving. It was almost like an episode of Holby City or something like that on television, except that if you were watching an episode of Holby City and all of a sudden President of the USA got involved and then the Pope got involved, you'd be saying, for goodness sake, who wrote this rubbish? But this is where true life was actually stranger than fiction, because it became this extraordinarily complicated and very painful controversy, and children and demonstrations and so on. There was eventually the judge gave his opinion and obviously in a very difficult situation, that with all the evidence that had been submitted, that that really wasn't any prospect that Charlie was going to get better, and the best thing for him to do was for the life support system to be switched off. There was a whole debate about a doctor who appeared in the States who claimed that he had a new treatment that had never before been tried in human beings. And he said that he thought this might benefit Charlie, and that gave great hope to the parents and so on. But then sadly, when this treatment was investigated further, the doctor agreed that actually the damage was so severe that it wasn't going to help Charlie. So it was a desperately painful and difficult episode, and my heart went out to the parents, my heart went out to the staff. It caused all kinds of issues at Great Ormond Street with demonstrations outside, other parents and children in intensive care. The whole thing was very disruptive. So very painful, and I think many people who got involved very well-meaning, wanting to do the best, but it just illustrates the challenges. As medical technology advances, it also leads to some very difficult and painful dilemmas. I believe the best way forward is to try and encourage a collaboration between the doctors and parents. That at the heart of the problem in the Charlie Gard case is there been a complete breakdown of trust between the doctors and the medical staff on one side and the parents on the other. And what I've tried to promote is what I called an expert-expert relationship, that where doctors and parents together collaborate. So we, the health professionals, are supposed to be the experts when it comes to treatment options, when it comes to the diagnosis and likely outcome and different possibilities and so on. But parents are also experts. They're experts in their own life history, in their own philosophy, in things that really matter to them. And they are the ones who are going to care for the child if the child survives. So therefore, it's really important that we meet together as experts and we try to respect one another's expertise. We listen to one another, we try to find a way forward collaborating. And that often takes time. It means we have to spend often hours in sort of discussion and debate and listening to one another and so on. But my own experience is that nearly always it is possible, nearly always, to develop an agreement and a consensus and a way forward. But it's very important, when I give this talk to medical students and junior doctors, I would say it's very important that part of the expertise which we as doctors bring is not just technical expertise, but it's also humanity and compassion and wisdom and ethical integrity that we're bringing. This is what we are bringing to this conversation. So as technology advances, at the moment we seem to have hit some kind of limit at about 22 or 23 weeks of gestation, and that's to do with the development of the lungs. At about 22 weeks gestation, the fetal lungs, the lungs of the unborn baby, are actually pretty much solid. They're almost like liver, the consistency of liver. And it's only after 22 weeks that the air sacs, called the alveoli, start to develop, and the lungs are able to function normally, and the baby's able to breathe. So if we're going to keep babies alive younger than 22 weeks, then just using the kind of conventional treatment that we have at the moment is not going to work. But there has been some interesting research recently in trying to develop an artificial womb, and this is a research study involving a lamb, an unborn lamb, and on the left is the lamb at 111 days, which is about equivalent to about 20 weeks gestation. On the right is the lamb at 135 days, which is equivalent to about 30 weeks gestation. And the lamb has been kept alive using very sophisticated technology. Now, I think it's still a long way away from this technology being feasible in babies, but it does show the kind of research that's going on and the amazing potential there is in helping babies younger and younger with the possibility of survival. So the curious thing in the modern world of medicine is, on the one hand, you get all this effort at going and trying to help babies be preserved right down to these very limits of gestation. Vast amounts of money and resources are being spent. It costs somewhere like £2,000 per baby per day to provide this level of intensive care. And so the total costs of ensuring that a baby at 24 weeks survive could easily be £50,000 to £100,000, all paid for by the NHS. all seen as something which we as a society want to invest in these little lives. We believe that life is precious. We believe its life is worthwhile. And yet just one floor away in the same hospital where I worked for many years at UCH is the fetal medicine unit. And here pregnant women from a wide area of London, the southeast, are referred if an abnormality of the unborn baby is found. And this is ultrasound scanning, looking for evidence of any kind of abnormality of the fetus. If there seems to be a problem, then frequently this technique, amniocentesis, where the fluid is taken from around the baby and that's then analysed, and the chromosomes are obtained. And these are the chromosomes from an unborn baby. And if you look on the far right at the bottom, you can see 2 X chromosomes. So that tells us that this is a little girl, as opposed to an X and Y if it was a boy. But if you look to the left at the bottom, under 21, you can see there are 3 21 chromosomes, when there are only supposed to be 2. And so we know that this baby is going to develop Down syndrome. We can't say from the chromosomes how severe it's going to be. It could be very severe, it could be relatively mild. But we do know that this baby is going to be affected in some way, likely to have some kind of educational problems and need greater support and input and so on. But in the UK, every time this particular pattern is found, the mother will be offered to have an abortion. And I don't know if you know what percentage of mothers in the UK, when this particular pattern chromosomes is found, will choose to have an abortion, but the answer is about 90%. So 9 out of 10 mothers will choose to have an abortion. And sadly also, because the amniocentesis procedure has a risk of causing a miscarriage, you can also calculate that there's a risk that a healthy baby will die for every few babies who are diagnosed with Down syndrome. So here we seem to be saying that it's more important to jeopardize the risk of healthy babies' lives so that we can pick up Down syndrome, so that the mother can then be offered an abortion. And abortion for Down syndrome has been going on for 25 years. And this is a graph, an official graph, which shows the number of babies born or diagnosed with Down syndrome. So the green lines, the graph starts at 1990 at the left and goes to 2006 on the right. The green line is the total number of babies who are born every year with Down syndrome. Whereas the blue line is the total number of diagnoses, the number of women who are diagnosed as having Down syndrome. And the red line is the number of babies who would have been born with Down syndrome if no abortion had been carried out. So the gap between the red and the green are the number of missing babies, the babies of Down syndrome who ought to be here. The reason that the number is going up is that because the incidence of Down syndrome is related to the age of the mother, and the age of mothers is steadily going up in our society. So there are a very significant number of missing children from Down syndrome and from other genetic conditions. And the interesting and the sad thing is that this has never been debated democratically. We've never asked the question of the population as a whole, do we agree that Down syndrome is so awful that we should be doing this kind of testing so that parents have given the offer of abortion? It's not something that's really been debated democratically. It's something that was just introduced because it was technically feasible. Doctors, it started being used, and it's now, there's a nationwide screening program. The NHS has done this, but without any sort of serious democratic debate. As you know, there are many people who care for people with Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome themselves, who've been opposing this and who've been arguing that why are you trying to get rid of us? Why don't screen us out? We're people who belong here. And many people with disabilities see the whole process of screening unborn babies and offering abortion is almost a form of discrimination against them. It's the way that the healthy majority, the normal, quotes, majority, try and get rid of troublesome people like us. And I find that deeply painful, that the whole medical system seems to be devoted to trying to identify abnormality before birth and the presence of genetic syndromes and so on. If you think that's difficult enough, it's about to get a whole lot worse, and that's because of advances in screening techniques. So there's something called non-invasive prenatal diagnosis, and what this means is that if you take a blood sample from a pregnant woman, you can actually learn a huge amount about the unborn baby. And that's because circulating in the mother's bloodstream during pregnancy are very small amounts of the DNA that comes from the baby. And this is a completely normal process. But it means that if you just take a simple blood test from a pregnant mother quite early on in pregnancy, you can then analyse that blood sample, extract the fetal DNA, and then work out a lot about the genetics of the unborn baby. So imagine, step forward 5 or 10 years, and you or your daughter or your wife is pregnant, and you're very happy about this, and you're looking forward to meeting your baby, and you go to the clinic and they say, we'd just like to do a simple blood test to check the baby's all right. And then you go back 2 weeks later and they say, well, we've got some news for you. You're having a little girl, congratulations, but I'm afraid there's a 60 to 70% chance that she's going to develop ovarian or breast cancer before the age of 60. And she's also got an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. And we're also worried about early onset Alzheimer's disease. Now, do you think it would be responsible for you to bring this baby into the world? Do you think that would be a wise thing to do? Or do you think it might be better for everybody for you to have an abortion and try and have a child who's going to have better chances? And so you can just see that ordinary people who've never thought about anything like this are suddenly going to be bombarded with all this kind of information. It's the sort of information which previously only God himself could know. Who could know what was going to happen 50 years down the line? Somebody was going to develop cancer or Huntington's disease or Down syndrome or so on. But now we've got a sort of godlike knowledge. But the trouble is that godlike knowledge leads to godlike responsibility. And the question is, are we human beings actually able to take those kind of decisions? But it's already been shown that you can get a complete readout of the DNA, and that means not only for things like Down syndrome, but conceivably it would be possible to know things like intelligence, sporting ability, all kinds of other genetic characteristics simply from a blood test from a pregnant woman. I think there's a very strong argument for saying actually it's better not to know. I think the way that we are designed is that you don't know anything about your baby, or virtually nothing, when you meet the newborn baby. And the wonderful thing as a parent, is you meet this wonderful little baby and you fall in love with them. They're so lovely and cuddly and wonderful. And then over the next 18 years, you discover all the revolting and unpleasant genetic characteristics. By this stage, it's too late because you've fallen in love with them. So we meet our children first, and then we find out about them. So the interesting thing is what this prenatal testing does is it reverses the process. You find out a whole lot of stuff about your baby before you've actually met them. And I think that's the wrong way around. That's not the way it was meant to be. So there is definitely a reason to encourage pregnant women to say, look, you don't have to have these tests. There are some tests which are valuable to have because it can actually help in treating the baby if there's a problem. But most of all the genetic tests actually don't help in terms of the baby. Really, in nearly all cases, the only reason is to give you the option of having an abortion, and therefore it's better to not to have the test. The other interesting thing is that paediatricians have come to the conclusion that even if parents, after the child's born, even if the parents say, we want to do a genetic test to find out if our child is going to do X, Y, and Z, by and large, we as paediatricians have said, no, we don't think that's right, unless it's going to really help the child now. we should wait until the child is 18 years and then they can decide whether they want to have the test. So after birth, we actually restrict what parents can learn about their children. We say, no, we have to put the children's interest first. You're just being nosy, you want to know, but maybe it isn't in the child's best interest. But it's interesting, this doesn't apply for the unborn child. It seems that in the unborn child, you can learn anything you like about your child, and so there's a sort of an inconsistency there. So this is a picture I often use when teaching medical students. I have the privilege still of teaching medical students and junior doctors at ethics, and I would show this picture and I'd say, this is what you look like, top left, when you were born. This is what you look like at 28 weeks, top middle, top right. This is what you look like at 18 weeks. Bottom left, this is what you look like at 6 weeks. This is what you look like at 3 weeks. Bottom right, this is what you look like at 3 days. As you go back in your own personal history, is there any point at which you can say, that is not me? And I don't think there is. I think however far you go back, all the way to the early embryo, that is me. That is the person. I am the same person. And therefore, I just think that's a helpful way of helping people think. If you make it personal and you say, that's actually what you look like, and if someone had destroyed you, you wouldn't be here. So there is a continuity, a way of tracing our story all the way back to the very beginning. And of course what the Christian faith also says is that God saw you and knew you. God was involved with you even before your parents knew you existed. You were there. Every baby has a photo album, and when I started as a junior doctor, the photo album usually started with a Polaroid picture taken after birth, and of Dad holding the baby. In fact, we've got 3 boys, and we've got 3 Polaroid pictures with Dad looking distinctly grey and dishevelled, having been up all night. Mum was in an even worse state, of course, and looking after just cuddling this wonderful baby. It's a very nostalgic picture. But these days, of course, every baby's photo album starts with a grainy ultrasound picture. And I think that's very, very significant, because what the ultrasound picture is saying is exactly the same thing. That's you. That's what you look like. That's when we first saw you. That's when we met you. So ultrasound is actually telling the same message about the continuity. I came across this. This is a very, very early ultrasound, actually taken at 6 weeks gestation. And that little blob with the calipers on it is 5 millimeters, which is, a tiny, tiny little blob. It's just a little blob of tissue. But love sees something different. Love doesn't see a little blob of tissue. Love says, we're having a baby. And let's put a great big heart around that tiny little blob. So that's the point. As we reach out to this being in the womb, we see something very significant, something very special. We see a baby. So, as I said before, going on to the working as a paediatrician, sometimes we do have this very sad situations where we come to the conclusion that however much we're trying to keep the baby alive, that actually there's nothing that we can do, sadly, that is going to help this baby get better, and that there is a time to say we're going to stop providing life support and allow the baby to die. But the point is that whenever we stop intensive treatment, we don't stop caring. We carry on caring even when, sadly, we come to the conclusion that intensive care is not going to help. And one of the privileges I've had over the years is both caring for dying babies, but also trying to teach others how to care for dying babies. And I've had the privilege of trying to develop something we call neonatal palliative medicine, which is really very, very similar in philosophy to palliative care for older people dying of cancer or other terminal conditions. We've tried to take that same philosophy but apply it to the dying baby. And I believe that dying babies, there are three things that every baby deserves, and that is food and fluid, analgesia or pain relief and symptom control, and thirdly, TLC, tender loving care, which for a baby means cuddles. And those three things is something that every human being deserves, and it's something that every baby deserves. Anything else is optional: antibiotics, intensive care, oxygen, IV drips and so on, but those three things are something that every baby deserves. And over the years, I must have cared for many thousands of babies, the majority of whom did very well and went home. But actually, it's interesting, as I look back on my career, the ones that stand out are nearly always the dying babies, because it was a special privilege. Although very painful, it was actually a special privilege to care for the babies who were dying. This was a very premature baby who became clear was going to die, and we found that with the right kind of support, the siblings, even quite young siblings, can actually help in caring for a dying baby. And paradoxically, it's often very helpful for the parents as well. By involving other members of the family, it helps them in their emotionally adjusting. This was a young girl who was only, I think, 2.5, but who was caring for her younger brother, who had sadly just died, and she was able, on the neonatal unit, to care and help to dress the baby after death and to bathe the baby. This was another example of a baby who had very severe bleeding into the brain, and it was clear that the baby was going to die whatever we did, and so we decided with the parents that we would stop the life support, and the baby carried on living for several weeks, so we were able to give him milk through a tube in his nose, and the mother spent many hours just cuddling him and talking to him. And when he finally passed away, she said the photographs taken during his short 6 weeks of life have been valued and greatly cherished. He's not just a memory, he is my son. This was another baby who had very severe lung problems, and the lungs had failed to develop normally, and we were trying to keep him alive, but we were having to use very, very high pressures and very invasive treatment just to keep him alive. And it became apparent that actually he wasn't going to be able to survive, and I remember sitting down with the parents and telling them the sad news that we weren't going to be able to keep him alive, and they were absolutely devastated. And it was their first baby. They were so looking forward to taking him home. And they said, we're so looking forward to having him in our bed and being able to cuddle him, and now it's never going to happen. So I had a word with the senior nurse about this, and she said, well, how hard would it be to get an adult bed into the neonatal intensive care unit? So she found an adult bed. We pushed it into it's one of the single rooms in the intensive care unit. And then we lengthened the ventilator tubes so it was possible to care for the baby on the bed while still being attached to the life support treatment. And then the mum and the dad, we shut the door and we left them with the baby, and they had a night cuddling the baby on the bed. And in the morning we all agreed that the right thing to do was to switch off the machinery, and the baby died in their arms. And I met the father some years later, and he said, I still remember that night. It was just a very precious thing. So we can't make every baby better, but we can care for every baby and treat every baby as being precious and significant. And so our goals are not to try and keep the baby alive as long as possible, but to minimize pain and suffering, to provide fluids, support where possible, to maximize the opportunity for loving interaction and privacy with the parents, provide psychological support, and aim neither to prolong life nor aim to shorten life. We allow death to occur naturally, but we support the baby and the parents through it. One of the remarkable things we've found is that when very significant abnormalities are found during the pregnancy, there's often a great deal of pressure on parents to have an abortion, particularly if they say the baby's going to die anyway. Surely the loving thing to do is to have an abortion rather than continue the pregnancy. Why put yourself through it? Why put the baby through it? Surely the best thing to do is have an abortion. But actually, over the years, I've had the experience of caring for many babies with a lethal abnormality, or what we now call a life-limiting abnormality. And what I've seen time and time again is it's actually much better, both for the baby and for the parents, to continue the pregnancy and then to care for the baby after death. And if you contrast what happens with somebody who has an abortion, often it's a very late abortion in these situations with a fetal abnormality, with the experience of continuing the pregnancy, it's completely different. If somebody has an abortion, often it's happening at a late stage of the pregnancy, their immediate instinct is to hush the whole thing up. Don't tell anybody, keep it quiet. And so you say, you were pregnant last week and you're not pregnant this week, what happened? And then the answer is, I can't talk about it, please let's talk about it, let's change the subject. The whole thing, there's a sort of a terrible secrecy, a desire to keep the whole thing hushed up. But if you continue the pregnancy and the baby is born, as soon as the baby is born, whether you like it or not, it's a public event. Everybody knows. Grandparents, extended family, siblings, people can come, people send cards. Even if the baby only lives for a few hours, there's still terrible sadness, but now it's done in the context of a social context. There are people who can support, you can have chaplaincy service, the priest can be there. There are all kinds of social support mechanisms are involved. So yes, there's loss and there's pain, but it's done within the context of a social support. And also, the mother knows that we did the best for our baby. I wasn't involved in taking the life of my baby. I didn't collude with that. I did the best for my baby, but I could see that the baby couldn't survive. We started a bereavement service for mothers and parents who'd lost a baby, and we held it once a year, and it was one of those very moving, emotional occasions when there were sometimes up to 100 parents or more in the room. We had it in a church in central London, and we asked the siblings to be there, and they used to collect up. We asked people to write down the names of all the babies who'd died, and we would collect them up and have a simple ceremony at the end where these cards were presented to God. And I think many parents found this an incredibly significant thing, because we were celebrating the lives of these babies. If you have a baby who dies, the baby only lives for a short time, most people just forget. Either they don't want to talk about it, or they just forget. But of course, parents never forget. And to have this kind of ability to celebrate the life of a child, even one who lived only for hours or days, is something they see as being very significant. This is little baby Christopher. Christopher was a baby who had a rare genetic syndrome called Edwards syndrome, which is like Down syndrome, only worse, and is nearly always universally fatal. And he was their first baby. They were close friends of ours, Alan and Verity, and his parents. And when they got the diagnosis, they came under a lot of pressure to have an abortion. But after a lot of heart searching, eventually Alan and Verity said, how could we destroy this baby? This is the baby that we've been given, however long he's going to live. And so little baby Christopher was born, and he had all the signs of Edwards syndrome. He had abnormalities of his heart and of his brain and so on. But to everyone's surprise, he didn't die straight away. And in fact, they used to bring him along to the church where I go to in central London, and where he became like a little mini celebrity, because everybody wanted to have a cuddle with baby Christopher. And he used to get passed round from arm to arm, and everybody was having a cuddle. And he was a tiny little baby, but he used to look up into your eyes like this, and he was quite placid. And in fact, he lived for 7 months. He never grew. He was the same size when he died, about 5 pounds, as he was when he was born. And we had a memorial service in the church when he passed away at 7 months of age. About 400 people turned up to pay tribute to this tiny, pathetic little life. And one of Alan and Verity's friends said, you know, Christopher couldn't grow, but he helped other people to grow. And I realised at the time, you know, there's something very profound about this. This is just showing the significance of even a tiny and deeply malformed and abnormal life, and that every life is precious and every life is significant. And I've also found, I tell that story quite often when I'm teaching about medical ethics, and I found that whereas most of my arguments about abortion and disability and all those kind of things have very little traction in the secular world, when I tell that story, even quite cynical and hardened people can have a little tear in their eye, because there's something about the humanity of it, there's something about which touches and which is the reality that every life is precious, every life is special. So thanks, it's been a privilege to talk to you. I'll be happy to discuss further or ask questions, but thank you.